Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? She sat at the far end, shoulders squared, hands clasped tight beneath the dim light, listening as voices rose and fell around her. Commanders leaned over maps, pilots traded strategies, and technicians scribbled codes across plastic boards. Yet no one's eyes ever settled on her. To them she was background, quiet, fragile, unnecessary. But she wasn't there by mistake. The hum of the overhead projector filled the silence between sentences. A storm rattled the windows of the underground bunker, thunder rolling against concrete. She waited, letting the others overlook her, letting their certainty sharpen into arrogance. They didn't know what she carried. Not yet. Her name was Elena Markovic, 33 years old, decorated but uncelebrated. On paper, just another soldier reassigned to a mission most considered impossible. In reality, she had lived more lives than the men who now spoke over her. She wore the uniform, yes, but beneath it lived scars that told of sacrifices no medal could name. One of the younger officers, eager to impress, tapped at the map. "We breach here. Alpha Team provides cover, Bravo secures the corridor, and Delta," he hesitated, eyes flicking her way as if noticing her for the first time. Then he corrected course. "Delta will stand by." Stand by. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing, not yet. Because silence was her weapon, it had always been. She remembered nights in foreign mountains, where the air froze her lungs and every sound could mean death. Silence had saved her then. Silence had given her time, space, clarity, and silence had taught her that the loudest in the room were rarely the ones who endured. Still, there was something burning in her chest tonight. Not anger, something deeper, something she could not show, not hear. Because none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that this mission, the one written in dry briefings and sterile coordinates, was personal. The projector flicked off. The room emptied in waves of footsteps, chatter echoing through steel hallways. Elena remained seated. She waited until the room was almost empty before she finally stood. Only one figure lingered, Captain Torres. He was older, with lines carved deep across his brow, his voice roughened by decades of commands. He looked at her as though seeing what the others couldn't, or perhaps wouldn't. "You don't agree with the plan," he said quietly. Her eyes met his, calm, unyielding. "It won't work." His gaze sharpened, searching her face for hesitation. There was none. "Then tell me," he said, lowering his voice further, "what do you see that they do?" The pause stretched, filled only by the echo of rain against steel. Elena's fingers brushed against the edge of the table. She thought of the folder locked in her quarters, filled with letters she had never sent. She thought of the photo she carried, creased, worn, edges softened by time. She thought of the moment she had chosen this path, when her silence had cost her everything, but had also given her something no one could take away. "They're expecting us at the main entry," she said finally. "If we move as planned, we won't make it past the first corridor." Torres leaned closer. "And you know this how?" Her silence was answer enough. He studied her for another long moment, then gave the faintest nod. "Sometimes the quiet ones carry fire," he muttered, almost to himself. She didn't reply. That night in her bunk, Elena lay awake. The storm outside had passed, but inside another one built quietly. She traced the worn edge of the photograph tucked into her notebook. A child's smile stared back at her, bright, innocent, untouched by the world's cruelty. Her throat tightened. She closed her eyes, willing herself not to remember the sound of the last phone call, the way the line had gone silent too soon. The others thought she was just another operative. They thought she had no stake beyond orders. But for her, every step of this mission was bound to a single truth. Failure was not an option, not this time. And so she carried her fire in silence. The next morning, the team assembled on the tarmac. Engines roared, drowning out final words. Men slapped shoulders, trading jokes, building walls of bravado against the weight of what lay ahead. Elena checked her gear methodically, ignoring the sideways glances, the unspoken doubts. Her rifle gleamed beneath the gray sky, familiar, steady. "Fragile," she overheard one voice murmur, barely above the engine's growl. She didn't look up, didn't correct them. She had learned long ago that words were wasted on those who had already decided who you were. Instead, she waited, because sooner or later silence always broke. The helicopter lifted, blades chopping through clouds. Wind whipped through the cabin, carrying the sharp scent of fuel and metal. Elena sat opposite Torres, eyes fixed on the horizon. Below, the world blurred, fields, rivers, towns reduced to fleeting shadows. The others adjusted their weapons, checked comms, muttered about contingencies. She said nothing. But her mind was not quiet. Every vibration of the helicopter reminded her of missions past, the screams swallowed by night, the taste of sand, the weight of decisions made in split seconds. She had lived through chaos before. She had walked away from it too. But this time, it wasn't just about survival. Because she wasn't just carrying orders, she was carrying a promise. And though no one else knew it, she had already decided. Even if she didn't return, that promise would not be broken. Hours later, as the helicopter dipped low over a valley, the pilot's voice crackled over comms. 2 minutes out. The team braced, weapons locked, breath slowed. Elena exhaled. The world narrowed to sound and silence. And for the first time since the briefing, she allowed herself a single thought. They think I'm fragile. Let them. Because by the time this mission ends, they'll know the truth. The helicopter's wheels hit the ground with a jolt. Dust rose in clouds, wrapping the team in haze. They moved quickly, boots pounding against dry earth, shadows swallowed by the broken terrain. Shouts echoed through the comms, commands layered over static. Elena fell into step, her rifle cradled against her chest. Her movements were precise, practiced, almost unnervingly calm. She saw everything, the glint of light on a ridge, the sudden pause of wind, the faint outline of paths hidden beneath rock. And in that moment she felt it, the shift, the one she had always waited for. The moment when silence stopped being ignored and started to matter. Why was her breath so steady when everyone else's quickened? The valley swallowed the sound of boots, the jagged ridges rising like dark teeth against the night sky. The team moved in formation, rifles raised, eyes scanning the unseen. Every man's breath rasped against the comms, clipped and nervous, though none would admit it. They were trained, seasoned, but even training has its cracks when the unknown waits ahead. Elena walked with them, her steps measured, her silence unbroken. The rhythm of her breath was like a metronome, calm where theirs faltered. She could feel their glances when they thought she wasn't looking. Why doesn't she say anything? Why does she look so calm? Fragile things don't carry themselves like this. But still, they doubted. The lead point raised a fist. Halt. The team froze, crouching low, eyes searching. The wind pressed through the valley with a mournful hiss, carrying the smell of dust and stone. Silence expanded, thick and heavy. Then came a sound, soft, deliberate, like gravel shifted beneath boots. Too close, too practiced. Someone else was here. A voice whispered over comms, movement bearing east. The team tightened their grip on weapons. A bead of sweat slid down the side of one man's temple. His breath stuttered. Elena's eyes shifted toward the ridgeline. She didn't need night vision. She trained herself to see patterns in the dark, to notice where the shadows didn't quite belong. And there it was, the faintest tilt of a rifle barrel catching moonlight, almost invisible. She exhaled once, silent, steady. No one else had seen it. Not yet. The commander gestured for Bravo to advance, completely unaware of the trap. Elena's fingers tightened against her rifle. She felt her heart beat, steady but insistent, like a drum echoing through her chest. She could speak. She could break her silence, call it out, warn them. But she didn't. Not yet. Because she knew if she shouted now, they wouldn't believe her. They'd hesitate, maybe laugh, maybe brush her off as paranoid. and hesitation could kill. So she waited. And when Bravo took their first step into the open, Elena raised her rifle. Smooth, quiet, one breath, one pull. The shot cracked through the night. A shadow toppled from the ridge, rifle tumbling into stone with a hollow clatter. The valley erupted with chaos, men shouting, scrambling, taking cover. Muzzle flashes sparked from the ridge as hidden gunmen opened fire. Bullets whistled, stone shattered, dust clouded. The team dropped into position, firing back, comms alive with overlapping voices. But amid the chaos, one thought cut through. She had fired first. Her, the quiet one. Captain Torres' voice broke through, rough and sharp. She saw it before we did. Stay with her. Elena didn't look at him. Her focus narrowed to the fight, the angles, the flashes, the rhythm of their attack. She shifted, fired, shifted again. Every shot precise, every movement efficient. There was no panic, no wasted breath. The ambush broke sooner than it began. Silence crept back, broken only by the ringing in their ears and the rasp of shaken breaths. The ridge lay still. Smoke hung low. One of the younger men cursed, his hands trembling as he reloaded. They knew we were coming, he spat. Elena didn't answer. She only scanned the ridge, her gaze cold, thoughtful. She had seen enough ambushes to know this was just the opening move. The commander's voice cut through. We move now. The team pushed forward, nerves frayed, glances darting toward her more often now. No words were spoken, but their silence had shifted. Doubt was bending, reshaping into something else. Curiosity, maybe even respect, though grudging. Elena felt none of it. Her mind was elsewhere. She kept her eyes forward, but inside she saw something else. The memory of a call that had come in the middle of the night. The static on the line. The voice telling her what had happened. The silence after. Her throat tightened. She blinked it back. Not now. They reached the entrance. A concrete mouth carved into the valley wall, dark and unwelcoming. The metal doors loomed, scarred and reinforced. The place reeked of old oil and iron. The team paused, breaths heavy, shoulders tense. Someone muttered, "This feels wrong." And it did. Elena could sense it. The stillness, the absence of natural sound, the way the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Torres looked at her, wordless, a question in his eyes. She studied the doorway, too quiet, too clean. "It's wired," she said finally. Her voice was calm, certain. "Step inside and we're gone." The demolitions expert scoffed, crouching near the entrance. He ran his scanner along the edge, nothing. He smirked, about to speak. Then his device beeped. The smirk vanished. Torres swore under his breath. How the hell? Elena didn't answer. She simply pointed to the narrow slope along the side of the valley wall, a path barely visible, swallowed by rock. "There," she said. The team followed her gaze. The path was treacherous, narrow, jagged. A misstep would send them tumbling into shadow. But it wasn't wired. The commander made the call. We move her way. And so they climbed, every step scraping stone, every breath deliberate. The mountain pressed close on either side, the drop yawning beneath them. Hands slipped. Boots slid. One man muttered curses into the wind. But they moved because now they trusted her eyes more than their own. At the crest they found another entrance, smaller, hidden. Elena crouched, inspecting. No wires, no traps, only darkness waiting. She turned, looking at Torres. His eyes lingered on her, measuring, reassessing. He gave a nod. "You lead." It was the first time anyone had said it. She slipped inside, rifle raised, silence folding around her. The corridor swallowed light, concrete walls slick with damp. The air smelled of rust and mold, each step echoing like a drumbeat. Behind her the team followed. Their breaths mixed with the hum of unseen machinery, the drip of water somewhere deep. One man whispered, "Feels like a tomb." Elena said nothing, but inside she felt the truth of it. It wasn't fear that gripped her, It was memory. Another corridor, another time, the weight of someone's hand slipping from hers, the ringing silence that had followed. Her chest tightened, she forced herself forward. A door loomed ahead, rusted, half open. She raised her fist, signaling halt. The team froze, she listened. And there it was, faint beneath the hum of machines, a voice, low, strained, human. She inched forward, peering through the crack. A figure sat slumped against the wall inside. Not armed, not hostile, just broken. A prisoner. Elena's breath caught. The others crowded, craning for a glimpse. "Do we move on?" one whispered. But Elena didn't answer. Her gaze locked on the prisoner's face, pale beneath the flicker of a failing light. Something about it struck deep, too deep. She felt the photograph in her pocket, heavy as lead. The silence stretched. She knew this was only the beginning. And she knew what the others didn't. The fire she carried wasn't for the mission alone. It was for someone she had lost. Someone who had once sat smiling in that photograph. Someone who had taught her that even the quietest voices could carry the loudest promises. Her hand trembled for the first time since the mission began. Not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. Why did the prisoner look familiar when he was a stranger? Elena stood frozen at the doorway, eyes locked on the slumped figure. The dim light above flickered, shadows moving like restless ghosts across the man's face. His skin was ashen, his breath ragged, his wrists bound with metal restraints. He was gaunt, his uniform shredded, but his eyes, when they cracked open, carried something that struck her deeper than reason allowed. She didn't move at first, didn't speak. Her hand tightened on the rifle, her heart pressing against her ribs with a weight that wasn't fear, but something worse, recognition without knowing why. The others shifted restlessly behind her. One muttered, "We don't have time." Another whispered, "He's bait, could be a trap." Elena didn't answer. She stepped inside. The prisoner stirred weakly, his gaze lifting toward her. His lips parted, words breaking through cracked silence. You're too late." Her chest tightened. Something about the cadence, the tone, it pressed against an old wound she had sealed long ago. Torres entered behind her, crouching to assess. "Alive but barely, we can't leave him." The commander hesitated, torn between the mission clock ticking in his head and the human being bleeding before him. The others shifted impatiently, their nerves raw. Elena kept staring, the air between her and the prisoner thick with unspoken weight. She wanted to ask him, ask what he meant, ask who he was, but the words stuck. Silence was her armor, but now silence felt like chains. Torres made the call. "We take him, 2 men carry, the rest stay sharp." The prisoner was hoisted up, his head lolling, but his eyes never left hers. And though he said nothing more, Elena carried the echo of his words like a shadow. "You're too late." The corridor deepened, swallowing them in damp, stale air. Pipes rattled overhead. Their footsteps echoed unevenly, boots striking stone and steel. Every sound seemed louder now, their breaths harsh, strained. The demolitions expert whispered, "This place feels alive, like it's breathing." No one disagreed. Elena led the way, her senses stretched thin. She could feel the eyes of the team behind her, the shift in their silence. Before, they had ignored her. Now they watched her, trusted her. But trust came with its own weight. Every step she chose, they followed. Every silence she held, they mirrored. She moved carefully, her rifle ready, every nerve alert. She thought of the prisoner's words, thought of the way his eyes had locked on hers. And beneath it all, she thought of the photograph she carried. The child's smile. The promise unbroken. Was this connected? Or was her grief forcing connections where none existed? The uncertainty gnawed at her, sharp and relentless. A sudden clatter echoed ahead, metal striking stone. The team froze, rifles raised. Torres signaled for silence. Elena stepped forward, peering into the gloom. A door stood ajar, swaying slightly on its hinges. The sound had come from inside. She pressed against the wall, listening. A faint hum pulsed, electric mechanical, and beneath it softer, irregular breathing. She signaled, Torres nodded. The team fanned out, rifles leveled. Elena pushed the door open with the barrel of her rifle. Inside, the room glowed faintly blue, lit by the flicker of old monitors. Screens displayed shifting lines of code, maps of terrain, signals bouncing across unseen grids, and in the center, strapped to a chair, was another figure. But this one was no prisoner. His eyes snapped open, alert. A smirk curved his lips as if he'd been waiting. Before anyone could react, his voice cut through the room. "You shouldn't have come." Torres barked down, "Hands where I can see." But Elena saw it first. The wires running from the man's chair, coiled across the floor like snakes, leading to barrels stacked in the corner. Explosives. Her voice broke the silence, sharp, firm. "It's rigged, don't shoot." The man laughed softly, a sound without joy. "Too smart for them, aren't you?" His eyes flicked to her, lingering as though he recognized something the others did not. "But not smart enough. You've already lost." Torres growled, "Shut it down now." The man shook his head slowly. "I don't control it, I only deliver the message." The monitors flickered, changing, lines of code dissolving into images. Faces, photographs, families, each picture lingering just long enough to twist the knife. The men in the room stiffened, breaths catching. One whispered a name, his voice breaking. Elena's chest clenched. Because one of the images was hers. Not of her, but of the child in her photograph. Her breath hitched. The world tilted, the hum of machinery fading into the pounding of her pulse. She stepped closer, unable to stop herself. "Where did you get that?" Her voice was low, dangerous. The man's smirk deepened. "You think you're here for the mission, but you're here because we wanted you here. You, Elena Markovic." The room froze. The team turned toward her, confusion cutting through the tension. Tor's voice was sharp. "He knows you." Elena didn't answer. Her throat closed, her silence louder than any confession. The man leaned forward, his restraints loose, deliberate. "You carry fire, but fire consumes. Tell me, does it haunt you, the one you couldn't save?" Her grip tightened on the rifle. Her vision blurred at the edges. She wanted to pull the trigger, wanted to end his voice, end his smirk, end the way his words dug into wounds she had buried. But she didn't. Because silence was still her weapon. The demolitions expert cursed, moving quickly to trace the wires, eyes wide with panic. "This isn't just a trap, it's a chain. One wrong move and we all disappear." Torres snapped orders, men moving to secure the perimeter. But the tension remained thick, choking, unbearable. Elena stepped back, forcing her breath steady. She couldn't let them see her break. Not here, not now. But inside she was unraveling. The child's smile in the photograph, the voice on the line that night, the silence that had followed, and now this man, speaking truths he shouldn't know, pulling ghosts into the present. Her silence had always been her strength, but tonight it was a weight. And as the monitors flickered, as the prisoner from the corridor groaned faintly, as the man in the chair watched her with knowing eyes, Elena realized something terrifying. This mission wasn't about the team. It wasn't about strategy. It was about her. And whatever fire she carried, someone had lit it on purpose. The courtroom had always been a place of voices, arguments clashing like waves, the gavel striking like thunder. But when the admiral's past was unveiled, silence descended like a heavy curtain. Every journalist in the gallery froze, pens hovering above notepads, cameras locked on her face. The nation had tuned in live, expecting another military scandal, another fall from grace. Instead, they witnessed a revelation so heavy it shattered their preconceptions. She stood there, her posture unbroken, though inside her chest a storm raged. Memories of secret missions, those nights when she led men twice her size through fire and ash, flashed before her eyes. The years she had sworn never to speak of were now echoing in this hall of judgment. The prosecutor cleared his throat, suddenly unsure of his next move. His carefully prepared accusations had collapsed under the weight of her hidden service. Every line of attack seemed petty now, every allegation dwarfed by the truth of what she had carried in silence for years. Whispers spread through the gallery. She was there in that battle, she led the rescue, all this time and no one knew. Her eyes swept across the room, finding both disbelief and awe. And for the first time, the Admiral realized that the silence around her wasn't condemnation, it was reverence. Yet she did not allow herself to relax. This silence could turn again, as silence often does. Respect could fade into suspicion, admiration into doubt. She had seen it before in war and in peace. People only honor what they fully understand, and none of them could ever truly understand the burden she carried. The judge leaned forward, his tone softer than before. "Admiral, you mean to say all this time, you were not only serving, but protecting us in ways we never knew." She gave no speech, no defense, only a steady nod. Her silence was enough. Her silence carried more truth than any words ever could. And in that moment, the nation watching realized. The woman before them had already given everything. But outside this courtroom, forces were moving. Enemies who feared her truth, allies who wanted her silence. And in the shadows, a new storm was building, one that her revelation had just unleashed. The silence that had settled over the courtroom after the Admiral's revelation did not last. Silence, she knew, was only ever a pause before the storm, and storms had a way of finding her. The judge leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed, his gavel resting against the polished wood as if even he dared not break the spell. Around him, clerks whispered frantically, uncertain whether to record the proceedings as testimony or as history. On the far side of the chamber, the prosecutor finally found his voice. His earlier confidence, the smug assurance of a man certain he would dismantle a fallen hero, was gone, but he was not ready to concede. He pushed his notes aside, stepped toward the witness stand, and said with a sharp edge, "Admiral, you ask us to believe that your silence all these years was an act of service, not concealment, that what you hid was sacrifice, not betrayal. But I must ask, why did you never tell the nation? Why hide victories that could have inspired millions? Why bury your deeds unless there was something darker beneath them?" The words stung, but not for their truth. They stung because she had asked herself that question many nights when sleep refused her. Why had she chosen silence? Why let history forget? Her gaze hardened, but her voice remained steady. "I did not bury them, I carried them. That was the oath." Her words rippled through the room. The veterans in the gallery, old men who still wore their service pins, shifted in their seats. They understood. Some bowed their heads, as if acknowledging an oath they too had lived under, one that civilians would never comprehend. But the prosecutor pressed on. "An oath to whom, Admiral? To the people or to the shadows? We are a democracy. Secrets have a way of corroding trust. You say you carried them for us, but I say you carried them for yourself, to escape scrutiny, to wield power unchecked." The gallery stirred again, this time in unease. Cameras zoomed closer. Across millions of living rooms, screens flickered with the face of a woman who had stood in silence for decades and was now accused of wielding that very silence as a weapon. The Admiral did not flinch. Her memories surged instead. She was back in that jungle valley years ago, the night humidity thick enough to choke. Her unit had been cut off, communications scrambled, the enemy closing in. Every voice in her earpiece had screamed panic until she spoke one word: steady, calm, absolute. And in that word they had found strength. She had saved them, not with fire but with silence. Silence had meant survival. Silence had meant lives carried out of the dark. Her eyes flicked back to the prosecutor. "Power unchecked is chaos. Silence was not my weapon, it was my shield for them." She didn't point to the veterans, but the gesture was there in her voice, and it landed. The judge raised a hand, trying to quell the rising voices in the gallery. "Order!" The gavel cracked once, twice. The noise subsided but did not vanish. Tension lingered, a current running just beneath the surface. The prosecutor inhaled, steadied himself, then unleashed the question he had been saving. "Then tell us this, Admiral. If silence was your shield, what truth are you still hiding from us now?" The words landed like a blade in the heart of the chamber. The cameras swung again. Reporters leaned forward. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Even the judge froze. The Admiral's fingers tightened around the edge of the wooden rail before her. She felt the weight of years pressing down. She knew this moment would come. Every soldier who survives enough battles learns. The enemy always finds the scar you most want hidden. For a long, unbearable moment, she said nothing. The prosecutor smiled faintly, believing he had cornered her. And then she lifted her chin. Her voice, low but unshakable, cut through the air. "The truth you ask for is not mine alone to give. It belongs to those who never came home, and it is buried with them where no courtroom can reach." The words struck harder than any confession. The silence that followed was different now, not reverent, not uneasy, but raw, human. Even the prosecutor faltered. His face hardened, but his eyes betrayed him. He had no reply. The judge leaned forward, his voice breaking the stillness with an unexpected gentleness. "Admiral, are you saying there are operations, missions, whole wars we have never been told of?" She did not answer directly, but her silence was not empty, it was heavy with truth. Every soldier watching the broadcast recognized it. Every family who had lost someone felt it. A veteran in the gallery, his medals glinting beneath the lights, suddenly stood. His voice, rough with age, carried through the chamber. "She owes no explanation. She gave more than any of us. Let her silence stand." The bailiffs moved to quiet him, but the damage was done. Others in the gallery stirred. Some clapped softly. Others whispered prayers. And in living rooms across the country, viewers began to see not a defendant, but a guardian, one who had carried unspeakable burdens so they would never have to. The prosecutor tried again, but his words faltered against the tide of shifting sentiment. He pressed about accountability, about democracy, about transparency. But each argument sounded smaller now, like paper burning in a storm. And then came the true breaking point. From the back of the gallery, a voice shouted, not in anger but in fear. "She's not the one on trial, the truth is. They don't want us to know what she's kept for us." The courtroom erupted. The judge's gavel thundered, bailiffs scrambled, cameras caught every flicker of chaos. But amidst it all, the Admiral stood unmoving, calm, unshaken. For she knew what the others did not. This was not about a courtroom anymore. This was about the storm she had spent her life keeping at bay. And now the walls were cracking. As the chaos surged, her eyes drifted to the tall windows where daylight streamed in. The world outside seemed suddenly fragile, unaware of the forces already shifting. She whispered to herself, words no microphone could catch. "They weren't ready then, and they aren't ready now." But ready or not, the storm was here. And she knew, deep in her bones, that the trial was no longer about her past. It was about what her silence had been holding back. And what would happen if it finally broke? The night after the chaos in the courtroom was not a night at all. It was a battlefield of silence and screens. Every news channel ran her face. Every headline screamed questions. Some called her a traitor cloaked in medals. Others called her a savior buried by her own honor. In bars, in kitchens, in dimly lit apartments, strangers argued about her. Was she shielding the nation from truth or shielding herself? But while the world debated, she sat alone in her holding room. The walls were pale, bare. The hum of the fluorescent light overhead pressed into her skull. She leaned forward on the narrow cot, elbows on her knees, her hands pressed together. Sleep never came, memories did. She could smell it, the diesel of old engines, the bite of cordite on the wind, the damp rot of jungle soil clinging to her boots. She saw again the faces of the young soldiers who had looked at her for answers when none existed. She saw the fear they tried to hide, the way their hands shook as they reloaded, the way silence was heavier than gunfire. And then she heard the voice of one she had lost. "Don't let them know, ma'am. Don't let them ever know what it cost." She opened her eyes sharply. The room was empty, but the words remained. A knock on the door broke the spell. It opened slowly, and a figure stepped inside. Colonel Davis, one of the few who had known her long enough to read the truth in her silences. His uniform was still crisp, though his eyes were ringed with exhaustion. "They're not stopping," he said softly. "The press, the politicians, even old allies are circling like wolves. They smell blood." She gave no reply. "They think you've hidden something catastrophic. They're demanding details, records, anything. The Senate's moving to subpoena files that were never supposed to exist." Finally she looked up. "And if they do?" Davis hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Then everything we buried, everything we sacrificed, will come pouring out, and the world won't survive the weight of it." The words hung in the air. They were not dramatic, they were not exaggerated, they were fact. The Admiral closed her eyes again. The hum of the light seemed louder now, like a distant engine preparing for takeoff. "Do you remember the valley?" she asked suddenly. Davis stiffened, his jaw tightened. "I try not to." "But you do," she said. He nodded slowly. "Every night." Their silence filled with ghosts. Both of them knew the truth. What had happened in that valley on that mission could never be spoken. Not in court, not on television, not even in whispers between old soldiers. It had been too raw, too human, too damning. And now the world was clawing at its edges. The next morning the courtroom was surrounded. Protesters pressed against barricades. Some carried flags and banners with her name painted bold. Others carried signs demanding truth, transparency, justice. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their blades cutting the dawn into sharp pieces. Inside, the judge's voice was rough with fatigue. "This court is not a stage for chaos. We will restore order." But no one believed that anymore. Order had fled the building days ago. The prosecutor rose, but this time there was no arrogance in his face, only calculation. He carried a folder, slim but heavy with implication. "Admiral," he began, "we have obtained declassified fragments from operations linked to your command. Documents suggesting unauthorized missions, unsanctioned actions carried out beyond oversight. Do you deny this?" The room froze. She did not look at the folder. She knew what it was before he opened it. Scraps, shadows, enough to stir fear, not enough to reveal truth. "I will not confirm fragments," she said, her voice steady. "Half-truths do more damage than silence." The prosecutor leaned in, his voice sharp. "Or do they reveal the cracks in your wall of secrecy? How long do you expect us to trust a silence that devours accountability?" Her jaw tightened. For the first time, anger threatened to break through her calm, not because of his words, but because she could see where this was heading. They would tear open graves to satisfy curiosity. They would call the ghosts to the stand. She breathed, forcing the anger down. "You do not understand the weight of what you demand. Some truths do not set you free. They bury you, all of you." The gallery shifted. Reporters scribbled. The veterans clenched their fists, their eyes burning with memories civilians would never know. And then the prosecutor played his final card. He pulled from the folder a photograph, grainy, black and white, a jungle clearing, figures blurred in motion, a shadow of her, rifle raised, standing at the edge of something unspeakable. He held it high. "Is this you, Admiral? Were you there?" The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, cameras flashing like lightning. The judge's gavel thundered, but no one listened. She looked at the photograph. The past roared back, blood in the soil, breathless silence. a decision that had saved hundreds and condemned dozens. She remembered the moment, the unbearable weight of it, and she remembered the words of the young man who had begged her not to let the world know. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, her voice was low. "Yes, I was there." The admission cracked the air. But before the prosecutor could seize it, she added, "And if I had not been, none of you would be here to ask me about it." The words silenced the chamber more than any gavel could. They rang in ears like gunfire, echoing beyond the walls, through every broadcast. The prosecutor faltered. He opened his mouth, but nothing came. The judge stared at her, torn between duty and understanding. The admiral's gaze swept the gallery. Faces stared back, angry, fearful, hopeful, broken. She saw in them the same conflict that had lived inside her for decades. She spoke again, her voice heavy with weariness and truth. "You think you want answers, but what you want is comfort, and I cannot give you that. All I can give you is this. Silence has kept you safe. Silence has kept you whole. If you tear it apart, the storm will not stop at me. It will consume everything." The words left a chill that no one could shake. Outside, the protests grew louder, clashing in the streets. Inside, the trial was no longer a trial. It was a reckoning. And in that reckoning, the admiral stood alone, fragile in appearance, but carrying a fire no storm could extinguish. The city outside was burning with voices. Through the thick courthouse glass, the chants rose in uneven waves, some calling her a hero, others branding her a liar. Flags whipped in the wind, banners snapped, the rhythm of thousands of feet pressed against the barricades. Sirens blared somewhere distant. The air itself felt charged, as if the entire nation had stopped breathing, waiting for her next word. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was no calmer. The judge's face sagged with exhaustion, his gavel worn from the endless hammering. Clerks shuffled nervously. Reporters whispered frantically into microphones, trying to spin a story that refused to sit still. The admiral sat in the witness stand again, her hands folded loosely, her eyes steady on the far wall. Outwardly calm. Inwardly, an old storm stirred. She felt the heat of the lights on her skin, heard the faint buzz of cameras recording every flicker of her face. She had faced fire, ambushes, missions that ended in blood and dust. None of them felt like this. Here, her enemy was not flesh but memory, not bullets but questions. The prosecutor stood once more, this time slower. He was cautious now, wary of her ability to turn his accusations into silence that burned hotter than truth. He carried another file, thicker this time. "Admiral," he began, "yesterday you admitted your presence in an operation long concealed, but the people demand more than fragments. They demand clarity, and so do we." He opened the folder with deliberate care. Papers rustled, screens flickered as images were displayed. Maps, redacted reports, lines of text blurred by black ink. "These," he said, "are records from missions tied to your command. Missions erased from official history. Operations with no sanction, no oversight. Ghost wars fought in the shadows." He let the words hang. The gallery shifted uneasily. Even the veterans who had stood in her defense now looked at her with something new in their eyes: fear. The prosecutor pressed on. "Admiral, the time has come. Either you explain these, or we will conclude your silence has been self-serving, not sacrificial. What do you say?" The admiral looked down at her hands. For a moment her fingers trembled, the faintest movement but caught by every camera, magnified on every screen. And then, as the world leaned closer, she spoke, not to the prosecutor, not to the judge, but to the silence itself. "There are things I could say," she began softly, "things that would make your blood run cold, decisions no one in this room would forgive. I carry them every day, and I will die carrying them, because if I lay them down here at your feet, they will not remain with you. They will spread. They will stain every soul who hears them, and you will never see your world the same again." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. Each word was heavy, deliberate, absolute. The prosecutor opened his mouth to argue, but a sound stopped him. A veteran in the gallery, an old man with eyes clouded but fierce, stood once more. His voice shook with age but not with doubt. "She's right, we've seen enough. We've carried enough. Don't drag it into the light just because you're curious." The bailiffs moved toward him, but this time more veterans rose. One, then three, then a dozen. Their medals gleamed beneath the lights. Their silence, their very stance, was louder than the prosecutor's arguments. The gallery erupted, not in chaos this time, but in defiance. Applause, shouts, prayers. The judge's gavel cracked over and over, but it could not silence the rising tide. And then, just as suddenly, it was interrupted. A sharp crack outside the courthouse, a sound like thunder. The room froze. Reporters leaned toward the windows. Sirens howled closer. Something was happening beyond the barricades. Moments later, a bailiff rushed in, his face pale. He whispered to the judge, but the microphones caught fragments. Explosion, protest, casualties. The courtroom turned to glass. Everyone could see through it but could not move. The storm outside had breached the walls. The judge, visibly shaken, called a recess. The cameras cut to chaos outside, smoke rising, voices screaming. But in the courtroom, all eyes remained on her, on the Admiral. For she had not moved, not flinched, not even blinked. Inside, memories flooded. She smelled it again, smoke, fire, the bitter metallic tang of blood in the air. She heard it, the cries of the wounded, the silence of the dead. She was back in the valley, back in the missions that had been erased. And she knew history was trying to repeat itself. Colonel Davis appeared at her side, his voice low. "It's starting again. They'll blame you for this. They'll say your silence caused it." She looked at him, her eyes heavy. Maybe it did. For the first time in decades, she allowed doubt to touch her voice. Not doubt in her choices. No, those had been made with brutal clarity. But doubt in whether the world could withstand them, whether her silence had protected or only delayed the inevitable. Back in the judge's chambers, arguments raged. Politicians on comms demanded she be forced to speak. Reporters spread speculation faster than facts. Outside, clashes erupted between protesters and police. And she sat still, silent, her mind carrying her back to one face. A young soldier, barely 20, hands shaking as he'd passed her the radio, his voice raw with fear. "Ma'am, if they ever find out what we did here, they'll tear you apart. Promise me you won't tell them. Promise me." She had promised, and she had kept that promise. Even now in chains, she was keeping it. But now the world itself was tearing apart, demanding the truth he had begged her to bury. Hours later, when court reconvened, the air was thicker. Reporters whispered of deaths outside. Protesters surged louder. The judge's face was gray with strain. The prosecutor, too, looked different, less certain, but still relentless. "Admiral," he said, "your silence no longer protects anyone. It is tearing this nation apart. You must choose, speak, or watch the world destroy itself in suspicion." The Admiral breathed slowly. Her eyes lifted to the gallery, to the veterans, to the civilians, to the cameras. She thought of her oath. She thought of the faces lost. She thought of the young soldier's plea. And then she asked a question that no one expected. "What will you do," she said, her voice low, "if I tell you the truth and you cannot bear it?" The prosecutor faltered. The judge froze. The gallery hushed. Her voice grew stronger, steadier. "You think truth is clean. It is not. Truth is fire. It will burn through your institutions, your certainties, your very faith in what you are. If I give it to you, there is no taking it back. So I ask you, are you prepared to live in a world that will never look the same again?" The silence after her words was heavier than any verdict. For the first time, even her enemies were afraid to answer. Outside, the storm howled louder. Inside, the weight of her question crushed the room. And in that crushing silence, the Admiral closed her eyes. Because she already knew the answer. The final morning arrived with a sky the color of steel. Clouds pressed low over the courthouse, heavy, swollen with the weight of storms yet to break. Outside, the protests had grown into something larger, something darker. Streets filled with thousands, flags, banners, fists in the air. Some shouted her name as a prayer, others as a curse. Police lines stretched thin. Sirens wailed without rest. Helicopters prowled the air like vultures. The nation was no longer watching the trial. It was living inside it. Inside, the courtroom was suffocating in silence. The air carried the scent of sweat, ink, and fear. Reporters hunched over cameras. Soldiers shifted in their seats. Veterans sat with folded arms, their faces carved by memory. Even the judge looked less like a pillar of law and more like a man trapped in the undertow of history. And at the center sat the admiral. She had not slept. Shadows rimmed her eyes, but her spine was unbroken. Her uniform hung heavy with medals that suddenly felt like shackles. She could feel the weight of every eye on her. But more than that, she could feel the weight of the dead, the voices she carried, the promises she had sworn, the silence that had become her armor. When the judge finally spoke, his voice cracked. "This court reconvenes. But I warn you all, chaos outside these walls cannot dictate order within them. We proceed and we conclude." The prosecutor rose one last time. His face was pale, his lips thin with exhaustion. He no longer looked like a man chasing victory, but like a man begging for something he could not define. "Admiral," he said, his voice quieter than ever, "the nation is unraveling. Every corner screams for answers. If you remain silent now, history will condemn you as the woman who chose secrecy over peace. But if you speak, perhaps we can heal." His words trembled with desperation. He was no longer the enemy. He was simply another soul begging for relief from the weight of uncertainty. The admiral looked at him, at the gallery, at the cameras. Then she lowered her gaze to her own hands. They were steady, calloused, hands that had carried rifles, held radios, lifted wounded men from burning wreckage, hands that had signed orders which sent young soldiers into darkness, hands that had held the trigger when no one else could. She had done all of it in silence. And now the silence itself was on trial. Her voice broke it. "You want healing," she said softly. "But healing does not come from tearing wounds open. It comes from carrying scars together." Her words were met with stillness. The room leaned in. She went on. "For years I carried what could not be spoken, because I believed, no, I knew, that if I gave it to you it would not set you free. It would break you. You would never forgive us for the things we did so you could sit here today. You would see your protectors as monsters, your victories as stains, your peace as a lie." Her eyes lifted, sharp, unflinching. "And maybe it was a lie, but it was a lie that let you sleep at night. A lie that let children wake to sunlight without fear. A lie that let you live in the belief that the world was kinder than it is, and I chose to keep it that way." Her words cut through the courtroom like glass. Reporters stopped writing. Veterans bowed their heads. The prosecutor sat down, unable to meet her gaze. The judge shifted, his hands trembling on the bench. "Admiral," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "then what are we to do? If the truth destroys us and silence divides us, what remains?" The admiral closed her eyes. For a moment she was back there, kneeling in the dirt, holding the radio, hearing the voice of the boy who had begged her never to tell. She whispered almost to herself, "Dignity, dignity remains." When she opened her eyes, they burned with a fire that silence had never dimmed. "You don't need my truth," she said, her voice strong now, rising. "You need to choose what kind of people you are without it. You can rip the past apart or you can honor the silence that protected you. But either way, I have already given my answer. I gave it when I carried those decisions alone. I gave it when I let the ghosts rest with me, and I give it again now." The judge sat in stunned stillness. The gallery was breathless. Outside, the chants grew louder, clashing, colliding. but inside every ear strained for her next words. She leaned forward, her eyes sweeping across them all. You saw me as fragile, as a woman unfit to carry the weight of war. You doubted, dismissed, mocked. And yet I carried fire in silence, stronger than every doubt, stronger than every wound. I was the wall between your innocence and the storm, and I will remain that wall even if it means you hate me for it. Her voice cracked, not with weakness, but with the unbearable weight of truth she still refused to share. The room sat stunned. And then, without waiting for permission, she rose. Chains clinked at her wrists, but she walked as though they were threads of air. The bailiffs moved to stop her, but the judge raised a hand. His face was pale, but his eyes, wet, unblinking, let her pass. The cameras followed her every step. The gallery rose in silence. Veterans saluted, some with trembling hands. Reporters lowered their pens. Even the prosecutor bowed his head. She walked out of the courtroom, through the double doors, into the storm of voices outside. The protesters surged when they saw her. Some screamed her name in rage, others in reverence. But when she reached the steps, she did not raise her hands. She did not shout. She simply stood, still, silent, unbroken, while the storm raged around her. The cameras zoomed in. Her eyes lifted to the steel sky above, and in that gaze the world saw something it could not define. Not guilt, not pride, something deeper, a dignity carved by fire and silence. The helicopters circled, the chants rose and collided, the storm pressed down. And yet in her silence there was peace. The broadcast ended not with words but with that image, a woman standing against the storm, fragile in frame, but carrying a fire stronger than every doubt, every enemy, every truth too heavy to speak. The nation was left to argue, to rage, to pray, but she was done. Her silence had spoken. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.